Boldwood presents You've Got This, written by Maxine Morrey and read by Gloria Sanders. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. So this was how it would end. Plummeting to my death from a Welsh mountain. I knew this was a bad idea. Terrible, quite possibly the worst ever, in fact. Jasper, of course, disagreed. Jasper thought it was one of his most brilliant ideas yet. An idea he'd had after a client he was currently schmoozing was marvelling over the amazing views on his recent trip to Snowdonia, thanks to being lucky with the weather. "Have you ever been?" he'd asked. "Oh, God, yeah, but it was ages ago now," Jasper had replied. "Before it became so touristy. Be good to go back, though." I'd kept my eyes fixed on the bone china plate in front of me, knowing he was lying. Jasper wasn't exactly what you'd call the outdoorsy type. But the more I'd come to know him, the more I'd realised this was his modus operandi. The thought that someone might have done something that he hadn't bothered him way more than it should, and he'd immediately begin rectifying the situation. Sometimes I didn't mind. The trip to Capri was pretty nice, and I certainly wasn't going to complain about the holiday to Mustique. Although the ban on cocktails because they weren't included in the deal he'd swung was a bit of a downer. As a hedge fund manager, Jasper had plenty of money, but he wasn't always keen on spending it on anyone other than himself. I'd tried to argue that I objected to him dictating what I could spend my own money on, but he'd gone into a huff and dropped a hint about as subtle as a tsunami that I was being ungrateful as he'd paid for the rest of the trip. I'd have happily paid my way, but as he didn't offer the best salaries in the sector, that ruled out that option. As usual, he'd missed the point entirely, and I'd dropped my objection. I didn't expect anyone to pay for me, and I'd done okay until I met him. It had been his idea for me to move into his place and to leave my long-standing coffee shop job and take a position at his company. I'd known from day one that particular decision was a mistake, but by then it was too late. But Jasper had really outdone himself this time. His never-ending obsession with one-upmanship had reached new heights, quite literally, with this latest endeavour. I looked up at the looming mountain in front of me and felt my stomach swirl. The delicious home-cooked breakfast I'd wolfed down this morning, threatening a swift reappearance. My eyes drifted up to the jagged ridge at the top. Oh God, this was such a bad idea. Thankfully, I wasn't the only one who thought so. Jasper was currently in deep, let's call it discussion, with the climbing guide he'd hired for the hike. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Matt replied, "but it's my job to keep people safe, and as much as I'd like to, I can't control the weather. Getting to the top today is out of the question. The cloud is too low and visibility would be poor to non-existent." "I hired you to take us to the top, not give up halfway. The word is, you're one of the best guides around, but I'm beginning to question the validity of your reputation." "Jasper." "What?" he snapped. "I suppose this works out just perfectly for you. You were against this trip from the start." Oh, good. And now we were going to have an argument in front of a stranger. Again. Never a great idea to piss off your significant other on the side of a mountain, mate. A giggle snuck out from under my defences, and Matt shot me a momentary grin, which neutralised the dagger Jasper sent. "Oh, hilarious. I hope you're not charging extra for your humorous advice." Matt blew out a sigh through his teeth. "Nope, free of charge." "Good. And just to let you know, I'll be demanding a full refund for this so-called service anyway. Trade descriptions." Matt's reply was patient, his gravel-edged voice even as he spoke again. As I mentioned, unfortunately none of us have control over the weather. That point is stated in the booking details. In the tiniest print possible, I suppose, Jasper sneered. No, same size. Actually, now you mention it, possibly a bit larger. I turned away, ostensibly to admire the view, but in reality to hide a smirk. Oh, quite the joker, aren't you? Nope. You asked a question. I assumed you wanted a reply. Jasper's face was thunderous, his high colouring beginning to turn an interesting shade of purple. He wasn't used to people questioning him. He was always the one in charge, the one throwing his weight around. Not that Matt was throwing weight around, which by the size of him was probably just as well. Had his trekking gear been white, I reckon there'd be a spike in sightings of Yeti on the Welsh mountains. Look, I don't want to fall out with anyone. I love this area and I love getting to share it with other people too, but my first job is to keep clients and myself safe. I'm afraid it's just too dangerous to go to the top today for anyone, especially novices. I'm not a novice. I've climbed plenty of mountains before. I glanced at Jasper's backside. Apparently the fire from his pants hadn't yet burst through his overpriced walking trousers. My gaze then slid to Matt. His bearing, unlike Jasper's, was relaxed, and his expression was as steady and immobile as the mountain we stood on. Suddenly he flicked his gaze to me, and I felt my breath catch. The striking ice blue of his eyes held mine for just a moment, and in that instant it felt as if he saw right through me. It was also clear from that glance that he knew Jasper was telling the most enormous and dangerous porky. That's as may be, sir, Matt said diplomatically. But you hired me as a guide for Crib Goch, and as such it's my job to keep both of you safe. Taking you further now would be irresponsible. You may be experienced, but clearly you felt the need for some guidance on this particular mountain, which was a wise move. There are aspects which can easily lead to difficulties if you're unfamiliar with it. Perhaps we could try again tomorrow, if that's convenient. The weather is forecast to improve overnight. No, it's not bloody convenient, Jasper fired back at him. Today is the only full day we have here. Some of us have proper jobs to get back to. Jasper, I said, flushing pink on my boyfriend's behalf, and sending Matt an apologetic look, as Jasper clearly had no intention of doing so. What? Jasper turned now, snapping at me again. This is all your bloody fault anyway. Hire a guide, you said. It's not safe without one, you said. And now look at us. I knew I shouldn't have listened to you, bloody women. I'd be up there by now if it wasn't for you and your bright ideas. The blush I'd felt tingling at Jasper's earlier rudeness now came out in full force. At least now, if anyone did get into trouble in the vicinity, they'd have a glowing beacon in the form of my face to guide rescuers to them. I did say I wasn't sure it was really my thing. Oh, so now it's my fault? Of course it is. The lady was right to suggest hiring a guide, and for someone who's never done anything like this before, she's doing well. Jasper issued a cold bark of a laugh. Flatter all the pretty women, do you? I see you're not wearing a wedding ring. You must keep yourself very busy up here. I lowered my gaze and looked for a massive hole in which to disappear. Even a small one would do. I wasn't fussy. Anything to extricate myself from this excruciating situation. When I met him, I thought Jasper Hamilton Grey was good-looking, charming and kind. I'd not long come out of a long-term relationship that hadn't ended well, and my confidence, never high at the best of times, had taken a hit. So when Jasper showed an interest in me, I was entranced. That was really the only word for it. The rent on my flat was due a renewal in 6 weeks, and somehow I let him talk me into moving in with him. He made it sound like a financially wise, not to mention romantic, decision. And for a while it was good. But gradually I began to see beneath the shiny, sleek veneer, and I wasn't a fan of what I saw. The sound judgment I'd been convinced of before didn't seem all that sound now. I was, in fact, in quite the pickle. I was not only dependent on him for a home, having given up my tiny rental, but also my employment. Jasper had assured me I wasn't fulfilling my potential making coffees for strangers, and I should come and work for him as an assistant. Something I could build a career out from. I liked my job at the coffee shop, but I knew it wasn't a career. It was supposed to have been temporary. The trouble was, I was now in my 30s and still had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. But then there was Jasper, with his promises of great pay and perks, and I'd be working in a swanky office in the city. The truth was, though, the pay wasn't all that brilliant. In fact, it wasn't much more than for my barista job, and I didn't get tips here. I also missed the interaction with the customers, especially those regulars I'd got to know over the years. And the biggest poke in the eye was that my job, my promised swish admin job that would help me begin stretching my capabilities and showing the world what I could do, Jasper's words, basically involved me making coffee for him, his clients, and the rest of the staff. Most days I was bored out of my skull and secretly longed for my old job and, even more secretly, my old studio flat back. I'd bought new clothes, as Jasper had said my old ones didn't really suit the new me, whoever the new me was. New or old me was sure of one thing, though. Jasper was often capable of being a rude, embarrassing, entitled arse, and today he was outdoing himself. "It's this way, I assume." Before Matt could answer, Jasper strode off back down the mountain, still yapping away to himself. Matt watched him go, the corners of his mouth tilted up ever so slightly. It was a really nice mouth. Not that I was leching, but it was hard not to notice he was pretty tasty in that I spend a lot of time outdoors doing outdoorsy things way. Not like a weather-beaten Captain Birdseye, just sort of rugged. Yes, that was it. Matt was rugged, with ice-blue eyes that looked straight into your soul. Those eyes now squinted at the bracing wind whipping up and ramming into the wall of rock behind us. But as he turned to me, I noticed they too had a hint of the same smile. Jasper amused him. Whereas my boyfriend had clearly been going for intimidating, apparently all he'd done was entertain our guide. "I suppose it's probably not the best idea to piss off your guide up a mountain either," I said, shrugging my rucksack back on. "You're a fast learner." "Sorry about Jasper. He was just looking forward to it." Matt put out an arm as my boots hit a bit of shale and I slid forward with the momentum. I grabbed it automatically. "Thanks." "You're welcome. Watch out for that. There are patches of it all over. Also, don't apologise for your boyfriend. He's the arse." He gave me a look. "Sorry to be blunt." "That's okay." "Fuck!" In front of us, Jasper was stomping along in a mood and did exactly what I'd just done, but without the care Matt had warned him to take before we'd put one foot on the mountain this morning. Too busy throwing his metaphorical toys out of the pram, he'd now slid and fallen straight on his backside. "You all right there, mate?" Matt held out a hand to help him up. Jasper pointedly ignored it, and its owner, and heaved himself up. Without looking back to see if I was okay, he stomped on. "So, do you want me to take you back to the hotel, or is there something else you fancy doing in the area today instead?" "No, there isn't anything else I bloody fancy doing. What a sodding waste of time and money. As for you," he pointed an expensively gloved finger at Matt, "just wait until I get on TripAdvisor." Matt gave a kind of side nod that indicated that was Jasper's prerogative. I felt an inward groan. Jasper loved that sight. The last time a hotel room hadn't been up to his exacting standards, He'd written a flipping essay. I say he did. What actually happened was that he dictated it, striding about his penthouse, peering down on all the people below. Something I realised now was actually the perfect metaphor for him, while I madly typed his venomous words into a review. What he didn't know was that the next day I uploaded my own review under an alias, giving the boutique hotel, which had really been quite lovely, a glowing 5-star rating to try and balance out his unfair attack. It wasn't the first time I'd done it, and I could see I'd be preparing another very soon. "Would you like me to drop you back at the hotel, then?" Matt asked again, his features still relaxed and impassive. Honestly, this guy was either a saint or on something. I somehow doubted it was the latter, seeing as he looked like an advert for an expensive health and lifestyle brand. Shame, though. I could have done with something to help me chill out right now. Jasper was almost puce with frustration. I wasn't relishing the trip back down south from Wales with a furious ribena berry. "Is there anywhere else we could climb?" The area was stunning, and I'd have been happy to explore more now that the original insanely scary plan had to change. "I don't want to go anywhere else. I wanted to climb this one," Jasper snapped, doing an excellent impression of a spoilt 5-year-old. "I know, but the weather is preventing us, so perhaps there's a compromise." "It's not the weather preventing us," he growled at me, shooting Matt a dark look. I let it go, as did Matt. He'd obviously sussed out, pretty quickly, that Jasper wasn't worth the breath he'd expend in arguing. Unfortunately, it had taken me rather longer. "I can have a look and speak to another couple of guides on the satellite phone. The weather can vary a lot within a short distance up here, so it's possible somewhere else might be more accessible if that's something you're open to." "That would be great, if you don't mind." I smiled at Matt, trying to make up for my boyfriend's unforgivable lack of manners. "Do you want to ask if I mind?" Jasper interjected, throwing me a look as dark as the one Matt had received moments earlier. "Before you and he start making plans together? Perhaps I should just go, leave you to it, as you seem so keen to remain in his company." I stayed silent. I'd forgotten to mention the jealousy. Firstly, it had been a little thrilling, in that strange way that the mind works, that someone wants you and the thought of others wanting you affects them deep down. But it soon morphed into more than that, and then it wasn't so fun anymore. Jasper liked his money and he bought possessions with it. Sometimes I wondered if he considered me as just another of those possessions. "If there's an easier climb available, you may not need me anyway, especially as you already have experience," Matt said, looking at Jasper. Full kudos to him for keeping any hint of sarcasm out of the last sentence. Jasper puffed up a little. "That is true." "Okay then, make your calls." He gave a flick of his fingers in a shooting motion. A tiny muscle flickered in Matt's jaw, and I momentarily saw it tighten. Maybe a lot of people wouldn't, but I'd grown up watching for these tiny signs that indicated people's moods and the possible actions that might follow. A tiny knot curled itself in my stomach. Matt turned away to make the call, catching my eye as he did so, while Jasper stabbed madly at his own phone, trying desperately to get a signal on it. Matt's face softened, and the knot miraculously unfurled. £2,000 and it still can't get a bloody signal. Jasper stomped off to another spot, further away from me, and I breathed out, turned to the stunning scenery we'd had our backs to, and let my mind drift, concentrating on the view in front of me and nothing else. Chapter 2. "So, apparently the weather is better on the other side of the valley. I'm happy to take you walking over there, or I can take you and pick you up later if you'd prefer. There's also a bus to the village once every hour." "A bus?" Jasper looked at the man, astonishment sending his eyebrows so far up his face they nearly shot off the top of his head. "A bus," he repeated. "Do I look like the sort of person who takes public transport of any sort?" Matt, wisely and commendably, chose to remain silent about what sort of person Jasper looked like, instead waiting patiently for a reply to the question he'd asked. "Well, I've already shelled out on your so-called services, so I may as well get some use out of you. That money can, of course, be very easily refunded if you'd prefer, sir." Matt certainly looked as if he'd prefer it, and I didn't blame him. "No, come on. Where's this better weather, then?" Jasper stomped between us, heading to the 4x4 Matt had met us in. "Sorry about this," I said, keeping my voice low as Matt and I both turned to follow him. His focus was on the way ahead. "You're not responsible for other people's actions, so you don't need to apologise for them." "No, I know, but still." I let the sentence drift off. "But still what?" I opened my mouth to continue, closed it when I realised I had no idea of what to say, and then opened it again to try and fill the silence. Matt had glanced back to check the path ahead, but now turned again. One dark brow rose a tiny bit, as if prompting me. "I've no idea," I said, exhaling. "I just felt like I should apologise. He's not always like this." Matt paused before he gave me a small nod of acceptance, which I got the impression was anything but. He was right, of course. It wasn't my fault that Jasper acted like a total knob at times, but somehow I always felt the need to apologise to the perfectly nice people who got in the way of his imperious attitude. Matt beeped the vehicle open, and Jasper, with a long-suffering huff, yanked open the front passenger door and climbed in, slamming the door closed with more force than was strictly necessary. "Guess you're in the back, then," Matt said quietly. "Guess so," I replied, looking up at him as his hand wrapped around the door handle. And then he smiled, just for a second, but it was enough. "You two took your time," Jasper harumphed as Matt started the engine and pulled out on the road. "Perhaps I should just leave you two to go off hiking." "That might be nice." "You strode off, Jasper. You could have waited for me." "I can't keep slowing down just for you to catch up. I told you, if you wanted to come this weekend, you'd have to keep up." There were two things wrong with that statement. The first was that I hadn't actually been keen on coming this weekend anyway, and had suggested he go on his own, especially as he had a guide for company. Jasper would of course disagree, but I reckoned he'd been lucky to land Matt as a guide, as he clearly had an enormous reserve of patience. But of course, I had to come. Jasper had been appalled at the idea of me staying at home. What would people think if his girlfriend wasn't supportive? Well, I supposed they might think that I could do with a break from him. But we couldn't have people thinking his relationship or anything else in his world was anything less than perfect. The second was that he was portraying himself to be some sort of expert at this mountain lark, and he wasn't. Matt, on the other hand, clearly was a bona fide professional. A real-life action man. Now he had his jacket off, a semi-fitted t-shirt hinted at some serious muscles beneath it, rock-hard biceps poking out of the sleeves. He even had the buzz cut to go with the image. I tilted my head surreptitiously to look for the eagle eyes switch at the back of his neck. "Comfy back there?" he asked, turning his head as he waited for a car in front to turn off the road, timing his movement perfectly to catch me peering at the back of his head. Crap. Yeah, fine, thanks," I replied, stretching my neck to the other side and doing that arm crossover thing that stretched your shoulders or your back or something. I never was quite sure what it did. I just did it before I exercised because everyone else did. "Good." "I'm comfortable too, you'll be glad to know," Jasper added snarkily. Great. It won't be too long now. Jasper looked at his Rolex. Glad to hear it. We've wasted enough time already. Matt's eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror, momentarily catching mine before looking back at the road in front. This is stunning, I said, looking out of the window at the swathes of green punctuated by mountains reaching for the sky. A sky that was, as our guide had promised, completely different from the one we'd left behind. Soft-edged white clouds chased through the blue sky above. There was still a breeze, but nothing like that on the other side of the mountain. I knew Matt wouldn't be taking us anywhere that would be risky. Jasper's manner often intimidated people and resulted in him getting his own way, but it hadn't worked here, and I'd inwardly and possibly outwardly drawn a sigh of relief at that. This terrain wasn't something to mess with. It didn't care how much money you or your parents had, what school you went to, or what car you drove. If you made a mistake or didn't give it the respect it deserved, you'd still end up taking the quick way down. Beautiful, isn't it? It really is, I said, peering out of the window and smiling as a sheep looked up from her munching as Matt slowed to manoeuvre a particularly tight corner. Are we nearly there? Jasper asked, looking up from his phone for 2 seconds. Not far now. Jasper returned to his phone, probably composing his TripAdvisor piece while he was still all fired up. Isn't the scenery breathtaking, Jasper? I prompted. Perhaps if he let himself appreciate the landscape, it might give his blood pressure time to lower, and he could actually enjoy the time here. His head lifted. He gave a cursory look around and returned to his phone. Yes. Very green. In the mirror, I saw the corners of Matt's lips twitch ever so slightly. Clearly, we weren't going to get any conversation out of my boyfriend, and I knew from past experience and from his comment earlier that if I struck up a conversation with Matt, Jasper would read more into it than there was. There was a rush of adrenaline thrumming through me that I'd forgotten existed. Standing here, at the top of this ridge, looking out into the distance at the green, brown and slate colours mixing in the landscape. Tiny people walking below us looking like the borrowers as they tramped along with rucksacks, various dogs scooting around, clambering up mountainsides far more easily than their owners. The sun had strengthened, and I closed my eyes for a second, feeling its warmth on my face, my skin, blotting out everything but that sensation. Jasper's puffing and huffing brought me back to reality, and I reluctantly opened my eyes. Having refused my suggestion of sun cream and hat, he was now the colour of a perfectly ripe strawberry. He was one of those people who didn't tan, but refused to believe it, and continually kept trying, determined to bend genetics to his own will. I'd shrugged and left him to it, knowing from many previous occasions that to continue prompting was a waste of breath. He'd be sore tonight. Great, something else for him to moan about. And it would, of course, be either my or Matt's fault. My money was on both. Damn boots. I knew that chap didn't have a clue what he was talking about when I told him what I wanted. I'd have been here quicker, but they're not. Jasper didn't elaborate, but instead he began poking at them and adjusting the laces. The boots were fine, and the chap might have known what he'd been talking about had he had a chance to get a word in. As usual, Jasper had marched in, demanded the most expensive boots they had, and marched out. Matt nodded sympathetically at him, but as he turned back, I saw the amusement in his eyes. Okay, not that sympathetic then. Did you enjoy that? Matt asked as we all headed back to the car. It was great, thanks so much. I've never done anything like this. You did great. Obviously a natural. I still think we could have done Crib Goch, Jasper sniped. Matt checked his phone before answering. Looks like the weather that side of the valley only got worse today. A couple of the other guides had to turn back. Perhaps they're not as good as they claim to be. I'm sure we would have been fine. I told you, I'm no novice. I'm sorry you weren't able to get up there today, sir. Even for the most experienced, it wouldn't have been a pleasant trek. Matt had clearly got the measure of his client. The only terrain Jasper had knowledge of was walking his parents' dog on their estate when he wanted a cigarette. In theory, he'd packed up years ago at his mother's request. She was the only one he didn't answer back to, so desperate was he for her approval. So, if he ever got a craving, he pretended he had to take a very urgent phone call and walked out, taking the dog, and lit up once he was out of sight. I had an idea that his mum knew exactly what he was up to. I'd met her once, and she was sharp as a tack. Needless to say, I hadn't met with their expectations for their son. Jasper had dismissed my concerns out of hand, so I didn't tell him I'd overheard their conversation when I'd gone to find the bathroom. Seriously, a map would have been useful. The sound of his father's old Etonian tones, reassuring his wife that all men had to have their little dalliances with such women before they settled down with the right sort. I didn't know if Jasper's dismissal of my concerns meant he agreed and had at some point plans to kick me out, or if he had decided to take a stand against tradition and closed views and make a life with someone not from the right echelons. I'd have bet his Rolex on the first. "Perhaps it's you that needs more experience," Jasper grumbled as he glared out of the window. Matt drew in a deep breath, let it out slowly, and we rode the rest of the way in silence. "Can you believe that guy?" Jasper dropped his rucksack on the floor as we entered the room. I picked it up and put it to the side, sliding mine off my back as I did so and placing it alongside. "We ended up having a good day, Jasper. Can't you just let it go? It's really not his fault that the weather wasn't good enough to do what you'd planned. It did look quite challenging, and neither of us have much know-how when it comes to hiking up mountains. So it's probably for the best, really. You can always do it another time." "I don't want to do it another time. I wanted to do it now." And we both knew that what Jasper wanted, Jasper got. I wasn't prepared to get drawn into the argument any further. I'd had a really good day. Matt was a great guide, patient, knowledgeable, and not full of himself as some instructors could be. The only thing that had spoiled it was Jasper's intermittent digs about how he could have been at the top of Crib Goch by now. Matt hadn't taken the bait. I didn't know where he got his patience from. After the fourth time, I'd been close to pushing Jasper off the bloody mountain myself. As I'd swung a dark glance round from Jasper's back, it had connected with Matt's. He'd sent me a quick smile and given the smallest shake of his head. He'd known exactly what I'd been thinking. I'd blushed, but Matt had just smiled more before turning his focus back to the path ahead of him. He might have been patient, but it was clear I hadn't been the only one having momentary lapses of tolerance with Jasper's sniping. "Do you want to shower first, or shall I go in?" "You go." He waved a hand without looking at me. "I have some emails to answer." Standing under the rain-head shower, I let the warm water and soft bubbles wash away the stressful parts of the day, leaving me to enjoy the rest of it. The scenery had been breathtaking, and I could have stood for hours just watching the colours change on the landscape as the sun warmed the crags and rolling green hills. Shadows had danced as soft-edged clouds scudded across the sun before it broke through again, illuminating the lush greens and glinting off the protruding rocks and shale falls. I couldn't remember any of the names of the surrounding peaks or areas Matt had pointed out as we'd stopped to take breathers. He'd told us their names in English and then in Welsh, which a lot were reverting back to. It was clear he knew his stuff and the area well. Whichever direction I'd pointed in and asked about, he'd been there with an answer, and had seemed pleased that I was interested. Jasper hadn't asked any questions. He still hadn't forgiven Matt for not falling into line with his orders, and although he'd climbed the range Matt had taken us to instead, he'd kept his head down and trudged on ahead of us like a sulky child. I'd tried to get him to take notice of the incredible scenery, but he'd made up his mind, and that was that. It was hardly the romantic weekend he'd sold it to me as when he'd returned from the building's gym one morning bearing a bunch of red roses. He could just as easily have come alone. But as it was, despite Jasper acting like an idiot, I'd loved the hike, even though I'd struggled at times. Matt had been patient and understanding, suggesting breaks and sharing the odd tip for getting a better hold on the scrambly bits. Jasper had just rolled his eyes and mumbled about me holding them up, but I'd seen him guzzling the water on the breaks and turning a bit purple at times in the steeper areas. If he'd been the type to regret things, which he wasn't, as he refused to believe he ever did anything wrong, top of the list today was probably those sneaky fags. Chapter 3. "What?" Jasper snapped once I'd finally got a chance to speak that night at dinner. "I said just let it go. It was hours ago and it couldn't be helped." "It could be helped. That guide bloke wasn't the best, and I'd specifically requested the best. He was obviously too much of a wuss to go up when there was a bit of a breeze." "It wasn't a bit of a breeze, Jasper. It was 50-mile-an-hour winds and dense cloud." "Well, of course you'd side with him." I sighed. "I'm not siding with anyone, Jasper. I'm just stating facts." "Facts he gave us." "Anyway, I really enjoyed it. Perhaps if you hadn't been so hung up on not getting your own way for once, you might have been able to enjoy it too." Jasper snapped his head up and looked at me. "What?" "I said—" "I heard what you said. I'm just rather surprised you have the cheek to be so rude after I shelled out on a romantic weekend away. This hotel is also supposed to be the best in the area." He tilted his patrician nose skyward and peered around. "God knows what the other places are like." "Jasper, shush," I said, mortifyingly aware that the lady behind the bar, who I suspected was the owner, had already overheard the comment. Jasper never made much adjustment to volume, even in public. He waved my words away. "I didn't have to pay for you, you know." "Jasper, I told you I didn't particularly want to come, and I did offer to pay my half, but you just went ahead and booked it. I'd actually have preferred to pay my way because your constant little digs about money are unfair." I had his attention now. "I beg your pardon?" I felt myself flushing. "Can we put today behind us and move on?" "What can I get for you?" A pretty woman aged around 30 asked, her hand poised over her pad. "Some sense for my girlfriend here would be perfect," Jasper snapped. The woman's smile faltered awkwardly, and I gave her a more genuine one, trying to smooth over the situation. "Have you decided what you want, Jasper?" "Yes, I have, actually." When he raised his gaze, it was so cold I had to suppress a shiver. "Sorry, would you mind coming back in a few minutes?" I said, fixing on a smile for the woman, who nodded and headed over to another table. "I want someone who appreciates me." "Jasper." "I'm done with this. With you." There was a pause before he flung the white linen napkin on the table and shoved his chair back. "You are, of course, fired," he added as he stood up. More heads turned and my own snapped up. "Jasper, you can't do that." He gave a cold laugh. "Oh, for God's sake, the only reason you have that job is because I wanted to get you into bed. There was no vacancy, but—" he shrugged. "Being the boss has its perks." "I have a notice period." "Not if you've indulged in behaviour deemed inappropriate by the company. I haven't. He shrugged again. Your word against mine, I'm afraid. And, oh, that's right. It's my company. So sorry. He gave a little finger wave along with a snake-like smile. How had I not seen this streak of outright cruelty before? Because he'd been careful not to show it, or because I'd been careful not to see it? I'll have your things removed to a storage facility for 2 weeks, which I will generously pay for, if you haven't collected them by that time. Jasper! I'll send you the address, and any pay you are owed will be in your bank within the next 14 days. He turned away. Where are you going? To pack and get back to civilization. This trip has been one disappointment after another. I made to stand up. What are you doing? Going to pack my stuff if we're leaving now. Jasper looked at me with cold eyes. I'm leaving now. You can do what the hell you want. But if you think I'm driving you back, you're sadly mistaken. Jasper, you can't just leave me here. Actually, I can do whatever I want. Goodbye, Fleur. With that, he stalked out of the restaurant, all eyes on him until, inevitably, they all swung back. Some less surreptitiously than others in my direction. I sank back in my chair. Great. I was now without a job, a home, and stranded in the middle of North Wales. Well done, Fleur. This was probably your most disastrous relationship yet. You okay, love? The older lady from behind the bar jogged me from my reverie. Oh, yes, I said, dredging up a smile. I'm so sorry about all that. Don't be daft, she said. Not your fault. I think that would depend on who you asked. I made an effort, but my smile was watery. Oddly, I wasn't that upset about the breakup. I'd known some time ago Jasper wasn't the man I'd thought he was, but I hadn't yet worked out how to get out of the situation. I was, however, upset at being homeless and unemployed. I'm so sorry to disrupt your restaurant. Better off without him, from what I saw. I agreed wholeheartedly with the sentiment of these words, but sentiment would only get me so far. The truth was, I was well and truly stuffed. Do you want something to eat? Oh, no, thank you. That's very kind. I'm sorry, I'm taking up a table. She laid a hand gently on my shoulder as I made to rise. You sit there, love. Give him time to stomp around and collect his things. She had a point. Come on, let me get you something to eat. You were out walking today, weren't you? Yes, I was, I replied. That's what I thought. Now, what can we tempt you with? On the house, of course. Oh, no, I couldn't possibly accept that. Of course you could. You deserve a medal for putting up with that man. I'd have clonked him with a frying pan before now if it were me. A giggle bubbled inside me. That's it. You've got a beautiful smile, she said, having bent a little closer now. Don't let anyone smother that, my love. You're so much more than he could ever see. I wasn't sure what to say. Now, about this food. In the end, I agreed to some soup served with warm, home-baked crusty bread. My appetite had dissolved into nothing the moment Jasper had told me I was fired, but Bronwyn, the hotel owner, was right. I'd burned a ton of calories today, and my body needed fuel. As I ate, I typed out a message to my old boss. I wiped the tears threatening to spill from my eyes as my phone vibrated and I turned it over to read the reply. Sorry, doll. I'd take you back in an instant, you know that, but we're fully staffed at the moment. What happened with the other job? Kiss, kiss. It had been a long shot, but I'd desperately hoped it would be one that hit the mark. Not worked out, unfortunately. Long story. Sounds intriguing. Must meet up soon. Sorry can't help. Will let you know if I hear of any other positions. Kiss, kiss. Thanks, that'd be great. Speak soon. Kiss, kiss. How was that? Bronwyn asked as she came to clear the table. Lovely, thank you. I'd really like to pay, though. Not a chance. Now, what tempts you from the pudding menu? She was relentless, but in a good way, fussing around me like a mother hen. I revelled in the unfamiliar feeling, storing the memory away for another time. Oh, no, not for me, thanks. Now that's disappointing. I mean, they all look yummy, but I'm really not hungry now, thank you. Bronwyn gave me a long look before relenting. OK, I won't push you any more. At least you've eaten something. I'll clear these away. Expertly she stacked the dishes and with a soft parting smile she took them away. So, next task, find transport home. Actually, scratch that. Next task, find a home, then find transportation to said home, and find a job, preferably all in the next few hours. God, Jasper was a shit. How had I ever fallen for his fake charm? I pulled up a letting agency website on my phone and began scanning. Hi. I jumped as the deep voice with its edge of gravel broke my concentration. Sorry, didn't mean to make you jump. Matt's striking eyes were shadowed with concern. Oh, no, it's fine. Hi. How are you? Better than you, I think. Wow, blunt. True. There was a glimmer in those eyes now. I gave a conciliatory smile. Fair enough. Did you stay for the whole show? Afraid so. There's not much that makes me miss one of my mum's steaks. Your mum? He pointed at Bronwyn. This is my parents' place. Oh, I see. Your mum's very kind. Yeah, she's all right. He grinned now as Bronwyn came closer and slid an arm around her son's waist. He towered over her, the love and pride evident in her eyes as she looked up at him. High praise indeed, she laughed, giving him a quick squeeze. You two have met, then? Yep, I took Fleur and her boyfriend walking today. Ex. Huh? Ex-boyfriend, very much so. Ah, yes, I was trying to be tactful. There's a first time for everything, his mother laughed as she turned to deal with another table close by. So what? Oh, I should have known the minute I was out of the way you'd be in there. Jasper's pompous tones rang out from the doorway as he glared at Matt. Matt turned to face him, his expression flat and unreadable. He held Jasper's gaze for a long moment before glancing back at me, sending the faintest smile before walking away. Looking for someone else's bed to keep warm, I suppose, Fleur? Matt stopped in his tracks and colour flamed to my cheeks. Hadn't Jasper embarrassed me enough for one day? I think it's best if you go now, sir. Bronwyn had appeared from nowhere and had now placed herself square in front of my ex. I'll go when I'm bloody well ready. No, you'll go now, she replied, calm, even and unmoving. And what makes you think I'm going to take orders from someone like you? Across the room, another man stood and made his way to the doorway, where Matt was now standing behind his mother. Oh, going to be the hero now, are you? My mother said it was time for you to go. Your mother! That explains things. Jasper gave a laugh that was more of a snarl. What the hell is that supposed to mean? The other man took a sudden step towards Jasper, who flinched, the supercilious look fracturing for just a second. Matt laid a hand on the man's arm. No words were exchanged, but he stepped back. Why couldn't Jasper just leave? Why did he always have to make a scene? It was one thing treating me like crap, but these people had been nothing but kind and helpful. I pushed my chair back and walked up to the group, tapping Matt on the arm. He looked down, then stepped aside, his hand still on his mum's shoulder. I moved into the gap he'd made. Jasper's eyes fell on me. Please, Jasper. This is between you and me. There's no need to drag anyone else into it or be rude to them. They don't deserve it. Ha! He was making eyes at you the whole day, trying to make me feel inadequate. Oh, for God's sake, Jasper. You're imagining things. And also, as shocking as this might be, not everything is about you. If you felt that way, then that's entirely of your own making. Now, please, just go home. He narrowed his eyes. My father was right about you. You're definitely not our kind of people. He gave a cold laugh. I'm not surprised even your own parents didn't want you. Please leave. Bronwyn's voice became stronger. With pleasure. And with that, he spun on his handmade shoe's heel and stalked off. I could feel the eyes of all the other diners boring into the back of my head, and all I wanted right now was to disappear. I'm so sorry, I said for what felt like the millionth time. This is a really lovely place. He's just... I think we all know what he is, Matt interrupted. And you don't need to apologise for him. Come on, let's get you a drink. Oh, no, really, I'm fine. I need to go up and pack. And where are you going to go at this time of night without a car? He looked down at me, his expression gentle. I thought I'd look up trains and buses while I was packing. Nonsense, Bronwyn said, shooing the other man away with a smile. My sons are very protective of me. So I see. You're very lucky. I am. Big lumps they are, but lovely lumps. I'm right here, Matt said. We can hardly miss you, my love. You're the biggest of the lot. She laughed melodically and gave his waist a squeeze. And my boy's right. Let's get you a drink and a good night's sleep and look at things again in the morning. Somehow I didn't think things would have miraculously improved by then, but I went along with her instructions, mostly because I was suddenly exhausted. I hadn't realised how tiring being with Jasper was these days. I was always on edge. Being on alert had become such an automatic thing I'd stopped noticing. But now everything was becoming clearer, including the fact that I should never have told him about my history. At the time, he had still been in his sweet and caring mode. He'd seemed interested, but I couldn't help but wonder now if he had just been trying to discover whether I was suitable to be introduced to the Hamilton Grey stable. I'd clearly failed that test, but had proved entertaining enough to be a stopgap, as his father had intimated, until a woman of the right calibre came along. I'd been a complete idiot. You look like you're beating yourself up over there. Matt looked at me over the top of a cut-glass whiskey tumbler. Not at all. He fixed that gaze on me, and I crumbled. OK, fine. Yes, I was just vigorously questioning my taste in men. He was an interesting choice, I grant you. Matt definitely had a habit of saying it as it was. I felt a smile spread on my face and realised sadly that I couldn't remember the last time it had felt this natural to smile. Mind if I sit? I shook my head. He wasn't that unbearable when I first met him. I'm sure. I don't know what happened. Sometimes people only show us what they want us to see. Yes, I suppose you're right. I'm sure he will be demanding tonight's room fee back, by the way. Matt gave a shrug. We can only issue refunds up to 1 p.m. on the day of the booking. If he decides to leave early, that's his choice. He has lawyer friends. Matt smiled. "Stop worrying." I took a sip of the Baileys over ice Matt had prepared and savoured the creaminess. It was ages since I'd had one. It was yet another thing that Jasper hadn't approved of, for whatever reason. I'd given up asking in the end. It was easier just to let it go. "So, where is the nearest train station?" "Don't you need somewhere to live before you think of going home?" "I'm working on that at the same time." "Is there someone you can stay with?" "Not really. I mean, I have a couple of friends who I'm sure would let me sleep on their sofas, but I need to sort out something more permanent. I don't like to put people out." "I'd noticed. It was hard enough work just getting you to take my hand earlier today over a couple of tricky bits." "It wasn't that. I was just trying to avoid trouble with the boyfriend." "Ex," I reminded him. "And yes." "Worried he might beat me up?" I snorted my Baileys and shoved my hand up to my face before it poured down my nose. Matt laughed, deep and rich and relaxed. "Don't make me laugh when I'm drinking." "Sorry," he said, looking far from it. And yes, I was. And with you out of action, there would have been no one to stop me pushing his complaining arse off the side of the mountain. Good job I was there then, I think. Quite. So what's the plan? I shrugged. Scan job and letting sites and try to get myself back on my feet again. Don't look at me like that. Like what? He appeared genuinely mystified. All intense and questioning. Matt sat back in the chair. Sorry, totally unintentional. No, sorry, it's me. I'm just... Actually, I don't know what I am at the moment. Tired, for one thing, I think. Matt stood from the chair and held out one meaty hand. I took it, and he hauled me up from the soft, comfy armchair I'd been ensconced in. Come on, go up and have a good night's sleep. Things often look better in the morning. Chapter 4. Not this time, they didn't. Unfortunately, things looked exactly the same. Although I had at least had a good night's sleep. I'd fallen into bed and barely moved all night, missing my alarm and only waking when a nearby church bell began to chime. I lay there for a while, listening to the peals ringing out before pushing myself up and into the shower. The water cascaded over me and washed away a little of the stress of yesterday, but it was soon replaced with a new level of anxiety as I thought about my predicament. Ah, there she is. Bronwyn came bustling over when I walked into the restaurant. How did you sleep? Not too bad, thanks, considering. Quite. Now what can I get you for breakfast? Oh, thanks, but I'm not hungry. Still, got to eat, it will make you feel better. You've got decisions to make and you can't go doing that on an empty stomach, can you? I got the feeling that fighting her on this would take more energy than I had. I'll get you a full Welsh breakfast. Sit yourself down there and I'll make you some tea. Bronwyn was right. Of course she was. Having seen the size of her sons and their automatic response to come to her aid last night, not that I thought she needed it, it was clear they were close and she'd aced mothering. Once again I felt that familiar pain deep inside. Slamming the door in my brain loudly, I returned to scrolling through letting agencies' pages. I'd been at my last flat for ages. I'd liked it.